Welcome to Defense Unicorns, a podcast for mission focused innovators. We educate, inform, and provide mission heroes with DevSecOps, cybersecurity, and organizational transformation stories from the world's leading problem solvers. I'm your host, Rob Slaughter, and we're excited for you to join us on this journey. Welcome to today's show. Today we have Austen Bryan, the former COO of Platform One and the current Unicorn Postal Service Postmaster at Defense Unicorns. Welcome, Austen.
Thanks, Rob. It's interesting to be on here. We've had thousands of conversations in the past, and now we're going to record one. So that sounds a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, I'm excited to share all the lessons learned. Every time we talk, I learn something new and just excited to capture it. And so to get us started, why don't you give us a little background about yourself?
Recently separated Air Force veteran, 11-ish years in the Air Force, which is my entire professional career. Unless you want to hear about my college and high school life, I started off doing Missile Defense Agency stuff as a computer engineer and former developer. They thought the best use of my time would be putting lasers on an aircraft, which is a lot of physics. So I got a lot of experience learning about light, which was interesting for me. Then I spent some time doing satellite operations, which is really honestly one of the highlights of my professional career so far, just working with airmen kind of on the edge of actually delivering some mission value, which was awesome. And then after that, I was headed down to San Antonio to do some cyber stuff, is what I thought, and somehow got a little bit bait and switched to a different program office that was doing some software platform stuff. I was told to go help us do a Kessel run, was kind of the words that was used when I showed up. And I had no idea what that meant because I had been out of that community for a while, and then met a lot of people doing software innovation in the DoD space and kind of got sucked into Platform One almost by chance, I feel like. And now I'm here.
One of the things that always impresses me about innovation organizations is just how grassroots they always are, or at least a lot of the successful ones, and how self-organized they are. Would love your thoughts on, you know, self-organized teams in general, and maybe a little bit about some of the self-organized teams that you've worked with.
Yeah, I didn't believe self-organized teams were possible in the DoD. You don't, the military, you get an assignment typically 6-ish months or so in advance, and you kind of show up to the job you show up to. That's on the orders for the most part. You get a little bit of say, and then for sure, the team you inherit or become a part of seems just like, you get the hand that you're dealt. Um, Nothing could have been more true of the Platform One generation story. But I honestly say I didn't think it was possible because of how strange it sounds of how we formed. I'll try to recount the story somewhat concisely. I found a weird document that had a lot of memes in it that described somebody doing similar work to me that was written, I think, by some people you know well. I reached out. We decided to come TDY and spent a day chatting about challenges in the software delivery space. Like a week later, we came back out, or maybe 2 weeks later, and it was a bunch of us getting together. I think that initial conversation got us somehow on the edge of the seat of the table to come talk about more people, including Kessler Run and some other organizations that I brought up. Met a lot of inspiring people, and the feeling I had was, wow, I feel really smart when I'm at my normal job, and then I come to this room and I feel really, really dumb. And I was like, I should probably spend more time around these people. And then I flew back from that trip a couple weeks after. There was an email in my inbox before I showed up to work on Monday that was some high level people emailing each other. And one of them just said, Austen works for me now. And I was like, well, I don't think that's how things work. So while it was grassroots, it definitely took some senior level engagement that I didn't think was possible just to kind of like move the pieces around. But it was definitely a group of people who met that wanted to work together, but I didn't think it was possible in an official capacity. And I think it required a little bit of help from above, but it was fun to watch happen.
So you got pulled into Platform One full time, it sounds like. Before I ask a couple more questions, for folks who are listening that maybe don't know what Platform One is, can you describe it for people?
Yeah, Platform One does a lot of things now. I think initially the vision was in the DoD space, there was a lot of innovation the years previous to Platform One starting around getting software companies on contract, finding good software talent and getting them funding in a way that could support small businesses or kind of non-traditionals. The problem is a lot of those software development activities happen in their what I'll call on-prem. By on-prem, I mean the development doesn't happen in a government boundary. And what happens is you have a bunch of really talented software developers who know how to deliver software well, especially in the commercial space. They know how to do great user design, great at feature development, great at reliability, just all the things you look for in good like acquisition requirements. The problem is they're not used to working with the government, and there's this thing called an authorization to operate, and this idea of just cybersecurity, and the paradigm is much different in protecting defense data. And so you have this kind of chasm, even though you figured out contractually, like the traditional acquisition issues of contracting and funding, what they haven't figured out is then how do you take that software from that on-prem environment where they developed it and put it into an ATO boundary, where the government can actually push and pull and use its data. And as everybody knows, applications without access to data is pretty much worthless. And so I felt like, we were contracting and working with a lot of great people, but we still weren't delivering any value. And so Platform One really looked at the process of kind of a little bit picked up the mantle of some lessons learned at Kessel Run early on of how do you create continuous integration delivery pipelines? How do you accredit a process and not a product? How do you then offer that kind of in a decentralized fashion to a lot of app teams so they can just show up, get credentialed to the CI services, and start delivering into production within, I would say within weeks to a month instead of within, the ATO process 3 or 4 years ago, it's probably still pretty bad, but I think on average it was 18 months or so to even start delivering the first piece of software, which is, you talk to a commercial company, that's just crazy. So I would say DevSecOps as a service, but that's kind of a bloated term that is buzzwordy.
When you started Platform One, you got pulled in theory full time, but was that true? Did you still have other jobs going on?
Yeah, I was the director of operations for Unified Platform, which was a pretty big ACAT 1 sized program for cybercom that was run by the Air Force down in San Antonio. And it was actually funny. I don't know if it was full time, like our programs kind of married together, but I think people definitely thought I was crazy because I wanted to work with this team more, and I wasn't able to kind of focus on that initially, even though somebody said I worked on that team. So I went to my boss and actually offered, I was like, hey, how about I just run this kind of software factory thing, which was Platform One to be named later. It wasn't called at the time. How about I just do that full time instead of be your director of operations? Because we had like a lot of other contracts and efforts going on that I was overseeing kind of as a portfolio. And so effectively, I asked my boss for like a demotion instead of like overseeing the portfolio. I was like, how about I work on this one program and that only? And he was like, he was really confused and kind of put off by that, but it was also a problem for him. So he's like, yeah, I guess. And I also got, I wouldn't say counseled because I think that's a strong word, but I did get unsolicited mentor advice from the O6 in my chain. And he said, be careful aligning with too many civilian, like there's this concept of HQEs, highly qualified experts, I think is what it stands for. And he's like, hey, you need to make sure you align with your tribe in the military and not these commercial people that are being brought in. And he kind of like was trying to forewarn me that like, don't get too close to this project that's going on because it's rubbing some people the wrong way and you'll probably hurt your promotability because of it. And he's like, the colonels you work for now will be the generals deciding your fate later. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Like you're assuming I'm going to be around forever or that I care about those things. So yeah, it was a little bit weird, but I kind of asked for a demotion so that I could focus on it more.
How did the Air Force respond to that?
It was interesting. I think a lot of people for like 6 months were shocked and confused. They didn't really know. I would say, because I was in San Antonio at the time, this was all pre-COVID. So, and most of the team was in Colorado, although we did a lot of remote collaboration, obviously. But I think a lot of them didn't know what was actually happening until we kind of actually, I don't know if we'll get to this, but like when COVID happened, we pushed a chat up application out that really kind of, even though that's not what we existed for, it did deliver a lot of mission value and it kind of garnered a lot of attention kind of out of nowhere. All of a sudden, we kind of like popped up with a product. So I think for a while they didn't understand. And so like it probably hurt my stratification amongst my peers, but I don't know, I never really focused on those things. I was really just into tech and I wanted to work with smart people. It ended up working like long run, my performance records were fine. I don't think it actually impacted me in a negative way, but I think it all is kind of dependent on how supportive your boss is in those situations, right?
Talk to me a little bit about, those first 6 to 9 months. Of course, for those folks who know Platform One, it's a fairly large organization, probably 200-ish people or so, plus or minus, maybe 50, and pretty well known for helping all kinds of teams, and including, the core development of Iron Bank and Big Bang and a number of products that teams that aren't even in the Air Force, but across commercial and D and Fed Civ use today. Is success always inevitable?
No, definitely not. And I would say, looking back on it, when we started, I thought I knew what we were creating, like this idea of kind of a platform that developers would use. But then we backed our way into stumbling around with a lot of different technology. Iron Bank took massive pivots. Big Bang wasn't even a concept, I would say. It was maybe some of the really smart people that besides me thought it was a concept, but I wasn't tracking it as a thing. And I would also say like we were scaling because and I hope we should probably discuss some of this later too, Rob. The funding, the way we funded something like this, I think is maybe the most interesting part because we didn't get permission from anybody to fund a new program. And we actually, I mean, we could probably talk it at least in magnitudes of how much money there was, but we started having teams on board and they would kind of pay us as a service. So they would send us money to our contracts and that enabled us to scale. And I think that's important because I felt like those first 6 months went from like 20 to 30 people to like at least 60 to 80. And that was before even more scaling happened. But I felt like we were reorging every 2 weeks too. And I'm a big planner in this whole concept of just like, well, just do a lot of experimentation and try and see what works. And I think it's, looking back on it is super important when you're looking for what I'll call product market fit, which I don't think it's a normal concept in the DoD either, right? Like I think a lot of programs, like a program manager gets hired, he gets handed a list of requirements that are super old and outdated and they just go do what it says to go do. And there's not a lot of like actual, well, what is the user validation or user segments validation? Where in this case, we were kind of like inventing something semi new and we had to kind of figure out who actually wanted it. And based on the user at the table, we would be widely open to listening to changing quite a bit just to kind of stay sustainable. And I think that type of entrepreneurial experience, I had never experienced anything like it in my first 8 to 9 years in the Air Force. And it was I was surprisingly got addicted to the excitement of it, even though I am a boring person.
So organizations who scale, do you think, within an innovation organization, is it harder for that first success or is it harder to scale that success?
I'm biased. I think every business has two problems to solve. It's value delivery and the ability to scale that value. I really think scaling is harder, especially given a bureaucracy. I mean, I think the Department of the Air Force, I think if you count like total force airmen maybe, but it's like 300 some thousand people, right? That's full-time active, government and military. And when you think about starting something new inside a system that is garnering, that is overseeing 300,000 people, like as things get bigger, they create more process. And a lot of times that process is targeted at what I'll call the lowest common denominator, meaning like one screw up means everybody has to now follow a new thing. And so when you have all these like rules and regulations and even just cultural barriers, taking something new and making other people accept it is like a whole different thing. Even if you can point to it and say like, no, look, like seriously, we did that thing and we had great examples of pilots and other people in the AOR calling us from, deployed locations, screaming at the top of their lungs as our peers that what we were doing was incredibly valuable to them. And we, by the way, didn't do it with any permission. Yet other people would look at it and say like, you can't do that because that's not something the system told you to go do. And so finding ways to maneuver in that there's some key ingredients that I think you need that's been discussed previously and, in different parts of the podcast you've had on this season. I think, senior leadership support and credibility within that system are definitely two of them. But yeah, I would definitely say scaling much harder.
Okay. You mentioned something that was, solving a warfighter need without somebody asking for it. Can you talk a little bit about why, to me, any type of organization going out there and solving a problem, especially, in this case, the Department of Defense, the customer, the user is the warfighter. I would hope that that's common. Are you saying it's not?
Yeah, I should probably clarify. When I said nobody asked for it, I'll say the system didn't ask for it, right? Not the normal requirements process. I think and as I've moved on to other projects doing something similar, I think there was a key ingredient that I didn't appreciate nearly enough in the Platform One story, and that's we have these really talented airmen, and I'll use capital A airmen for the military people, right? Meaning any rank or background, but they're on the edge of doing some mission, or it could be sustainment, could be new, and they know they have all the information and know how to fix their problem. They just don't have the tools typically. And so we had this incredible pull, I'll say, from some innovators at the edge of actual missions. That could be pilots, could be maintainers on a flight line, space operators, didn't matter. They had all these ideas, just nobody was there to enable them with the tools or teach them how to take their knowledge and apply it to that domain. And so I would say we had people that around because we were mid-level officers enlisted running the program. Our kind of peers were also mid-level running these different missions and operations across the Air Force. They kind of saw what we were doing and had enough technical background to say like, hey, if we partner together, we can close this gap that I talked about earlier on software delivery. And so there was 2 or 3 really key early adopters that from like our peer level were also shouting into a megaphone to their, colonels and generals like, no, look, like a bunch of crazy captains and lieutenants and majors and master sergeants can actually go do this whole thing by themselves. And if we just work together and kind of ignore the system around and we just bridge directly to each other, we were able to get those. That's how we were kind of able to get those first wins. But it wouldn't have happened without them. And having that pull from the user community, even if it's really, really small and niche at first, is really, really critical.
Was there ever a time where you wished you didn't actually work at Platform One? Like specifically, thought about leaving or quitting or anything like that?
It's a good question. I definitely think the workload stressed me out more than any other job I've had before. And it's twofold, right? Like everybody, especially in the defense department, has a stressful job. Like there is, and I'm not ever going to pretend I've had a job where like lives are necessarily on the line, although it feels that way in certain systems that you're supporting. But my life's never been there. But I'll say the twofold part of it is not just the stress of delivering for your user, it's the stress of people hating you for it. There's like this, not only you're like religiously believing in the thing that you're doing like a zealot, right? But then people are also telling you you're wrong the whole time for doing it. Yet you can, and then you feel crazy because you can see the fruits of your labor. And you start thinking like, if nobody else can see it, am I the crazy one? And then when you combine that with like 80-hour work weeks and juggling multiple responsibilities, it starts to wear on you. Like anybody can surge, I think, for a few months at a time, but when it becomes like, 6 months to a year, it gets tough. And I've heard people earlier on this podcast talk about how lonely it is. I feel lucky that there was kind of a group of what I'll say about 6 of us, at least the people on the government side I talk to frequently, that were like a mini support group because I definitely would have tried to quit had we not at least been able to explain those, at least go through that experience together as a team.
Do you think that type of success from an innovation perspective, do you think it's repeatable? Meaning, like, do you think there was something unique and special? Because I do think that it's interesting. Some organizations, innovation organizations, reach full maturity and scale, and others don't. For the organizations that do find traction and do scale, what are the similarities?
Yeah, that's a really, really profound question as well. Is it a repeatable process? I think it is. It's like anything else. There's ingredients that you need, and just because you have the ingredients doesn't necessarily mean, the cake's gonna get made the way you want. But I do think if you put the ingredients together with like a recipe that's gonna at least tell you to use a kitchen instead of a garage or something, you're probably your chances of success, I wouldn't say it's guaranteed that you can just go do this repeatably, right? But I think you can greatly increase the probability. Um, I think some of the things we already talked about are those ingredients, right? You need a grassroots team. To me, I hear that a lot, but what I really think that means to me is you have people that foundationally, before anything else, believe in what they're doing. Because a grassroots team really only forms if, like, at their core, they believe in it. And I mean, like, believe. Because, like, what I see a lot of times is people go, like, collect knowledge, but they have no practical application or actual belief in it. They just know that's what people are doing now. And, like, that doesn't create anything, right? You have to have people who have, like, gotten scar tissue from being frustrated with the problem, and they, like, actually are crazy enough to believe they can fix it. And I do think senior level support is required, right? And I don't necessarily mean your boss, because someone, I won't name who, once told me the only way to be successful in the military is to not work for your boss, which is, I've learned over time, is painfully true. But you need somebody with pretty high level ability. I'm talking like, you got to be 2, 3, 4 star level, in my opinion, to like at least advocate for the thing. It like gives you just enough of a vacuum to operate. Don't get me wrong, people are still trying to like shoot bullets into that vacuum consistently, but you need somebody to protect you, because even if you deliver that value, like I think that scaling piece, especially as you're tipping from value to scaling that value, like people come after you. People come after you and want to kill it. That's when you get enough attention where people really want to kill it, and you need somebody to kind of shield enough to keep you alive every day.
You mentioned scar tissue. Is scar tissue or really a previous failure a prerequisite for future success?
Yeah, maybe unless you get incredibly lucky. I think the scar tissue helps the belief factor, but I do think failures under your belt help you get it right the next time and increase your probability each time. And as long as you're not, you don't give up and you keep believing. For me, I think that's one of the, I probably should have mentioned as an ingredient. One of the special things about Platform One is I really felt everybody on the kind of founding government team had lived with crappy software in a time in their life that it really mattered to do their job. And they just wanted to do their job and they couldn't because of software. And for me in particular, working in space ops, I had an airman that lost a stripe because of it. He was assessed for a critical error that I believe was a software issue. I mean, I was his boss, and they didn't care about my opinion, even though I tried to give it. And I also had an airman lose his TS clearance because he loaded a bash script directly to the TS weapon system without permission to automate one of his functions to deliver the mission better. And lo and behold, we have an airman with the skill set, the technical skill set, and access to deliver to fix a problem, and we punish him for it. And so for me, those two stories I'll never forget because they were enlisted guys who worked for me. So I think that helped my belief factor in why, like, every day, even when people, were shouting at us that we couldn't do this, that I was like, yeah, yeah, right. We'll prove it to you anyways. So those two airmen I'll always remember. And then the previous failures, right? I helped start Level Up, which Rob didn't mention in my intro, which is fine. I definitely didn't know what I was doing. I definitely was trying to follow people I thought were smarter, but the paths we took on that were definitely not best. I mean, I think that failure definitely helped, like I said, increase probability the second time around.
You're on this journey to really figure out continuous software delivery for secure environments. Talk about the importance of that, not only for organizations, but actually like from a Department of Defense or national security perspective.
Yeah, I think a large segment of our kind of economy, if you will, if you think about all the developers that are out there to help on problems, which is a lot of people these days, they don't really understand that, like, the most critical things that happen in this country don't happen on the cloud. I'll say on the cloud, meaning like commercial AWS. You can't just go get an account and be like, I made this app for the government. Now send me your F-22 sortie data for the day, right? Like you can't just be like, hey, I'm in Afghanistan. We have 12 F-22s here, and here's their flight patterns for the day. As an example, right? I've never even worked on one of those systems, but all this data, whether it be critical SCADA energy data, whether it be health information that has all your social security and your PII, or whether it be Department of Defense, secrets we have of other nations, of ourselves, whatever's out there, like, the most important software does not run on the cloud connected to the internet. And that's kind of a niche thing, but it's a super important thing, right? Because if you think about, I mean, I always joked when we were trying to recruit developers of Platform One, right? I'm like, and we were lucky enough to get good at recruiting against some of the bigs, right? Like, do you get out of bed to deliver new features to Facebook, or do you want to, like, radically change how we fight wars and the security of both the homeland and allies abroad? And, like, people gravitate towards the mission for sure. Like, the DoD in particular has the market on mission, and that matters to a lot of people. There's just a lot of other things. There's a few other key components that they're on the opposite end of the spectrum for that they need to work on. But yeah, the mission really pulls people in, as you know, Rob.
So talk to me a little bit about what's stopping scalability of continuous delivery. And, for anybody who's following the government space, there's been huge strides across different software factories and I think small groups really, really, really figuring it out. But it's probably for sure less than 10%, but probably less than, 5 or even 3% of total software capabilities delivered continuously and reliably and in a secure manner. So what is the delta between the success that's found in, a Platform One or, Kessel Run or Project Blue, and what is the delta between what those organizations are doing versus organizations that maybe don't have that capability?
Yeah, any chance I got towards the end of my time at Platform One, and I got to speak to a lot of VPs just because of the visibility, which I'm grateful for, and I'm grateful for another chance to stand on this soapbox and talk about it. But I would tell them verbatim that the number one threat to strategic defense, or the defense of our homeland, is talent management, and it's our HR system. It is so broken, and it's directly the root cause of, like, if you every major problem over the 3-ish years I was about Platform One, if you peeled the onion back far enough, I would say 95% of them were due to talent management issues. And it's because and it's not even, I don't want people to hear that as a money thing, because that's not even close to true. It's a, do we value this skill set thing? And is there a way to continually use this skill set and grow this skill set over a career? And it's shocking to me that in 2022 that we're talking about that as a problem, because like every Fortune 500 company has an internal software capability, like with their people, with their human capital, because there's a value line somewhere in their tech stack at some point, whatever that's different for a lot of companies. They've said, we need to control this space and have expertise in it. Yet I see the DoD making very little progress in that conversation for their human capital. And what stops somebody from being able to start a new thing like that and kills the scalability is the people leave. The people leave. And you don't and that's gonna happen to a degree, but at least they should be leaving for each other, not leaving for something radically different. And that's what kills innovation, in my opinion. Or the converse side of that is the system eats the thing, right? It parachutes people in from outside of the learning and knowledge and belief that we talked about earlier, and it parachutes them in and they make changes. And I won't name any organizations, but that's been seen a lot to a lot of different organizations. That's not unique to, I'm not even saying that happened at Platform One. That's not unique to Platform One. I see that happening to peers that I've met in this space that have been successful. There's all of a sudden people who gain kind of authority in certain parts of these things who really have no idea what's going on. They're like, I want to radically change this thing because I don't understand it.
How do you solve that? How do you maybe not even solve? How do you make that better?
Yeah, like I said, they've cornered the market on mission. So like autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? I think about kind of the things that most knowledge workers want. So purpose, I think, is super easy. That one's like a layup for the Department of Defense. Autonomy is tough. I'll use flexibility when I think of autonomy. We during COVID, a lot of us went home for work, right? Most of us had the opportunity to work from home. And I actually like a hybrid work environment because I miss people. But at the end of the day, a lot of software developers who need to be in a flow, think about our market for software, they need to be in a flow, which sometimes takes, 2 to 4 hours to solve a hard problem. That's really easy to do from home compared to being in a cubicle where people walk by or somebody asks if you're filing the right TPS reports, the equivalent of in today's world. And so I really think we haven't figured out flexibility and really given people autonomy. We expect them to come into the office because if I can't see them, they're not working, even though they don't realize in the software world, you can metric everything. Everything they do is like, if you wanted to, is traceable. It's so easy to tell if somebody on your team is actually being productive without physically seeing them with your eyeballs. So I think we need to make big strides on like, what does hybrid or telework look like for the Department of Defense, especially their government employees. I think, hybrid models are probably going to, in my opinion, are going to survive this whole, like, I don't think it's going to be either end of the spectrum of in the office or remote, something in between. But there's no reason you can't have centers of gravity for software intensive programs across the United States and some of the biggest software talent beds, and create co-working environments where those people can be in the office, or you get an assignment and it says, hey, for your assignment, you can go to Denver, Austin, or DC. I think people would be thrilled, right? Not like, oh, go to South Dakota and work in a shelter with asbestos. So that's the other one. And then mastery kills me too. To me, I think about that as, how can I continue to develop my skills over a career? Like, I don't want to do 3 years of software and then 4 years of like air doctrine and money whipping at the hill. Like, does that add value for some people's roles? Absolutely. But that's like a one size fits all model for like general officers, and not like saying, hey, there's a career field where you can continually develop your skills for 20 years. You can go to KubeCon, you can be a part of the Linux Foundation, you can do all these things. You can go work at Amazon for a year, then come back to government. There's all these things they could do, and they won't, like, as far as I can tell, that those are outlandish ideas to them that they could ever do that. So I think those two legs to go with the purpose is what they need to fix.
Right? Go back in time, 4 to 5 years in your career, you're starting to gain some expertise. If you could go back in time and had a really, really amazing idea of how to make your organization better, how would you walk through the steps to make that a reality?
You're saying starting something new again?
Yeah, if you had to do it all over again, knowing what you knew now, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, what are the steps that you would go through to see it happen?
Yeah, I think humility is one of the biggest things that is needed to start something new in the innovation space, and that's something that you find least in some of the entrepreneurial visionaries that you meet along the way. it's rare to be an entrepreneur or visionary, and it's even more rare to find one that's going to be humble. And I say that because you really need to be able to learn from other people, because other people have walked your steps, whether you think it or not. Like, it might not be your same product, right? But you need to look at how they did it. And not only like read books about how Apple started, right? Like, everybody's done that. But you need to talk to people who have done it in your ecosystem, like the Department of Defense or the Air Force. Like, get very specific to your context, because everything needs to be context specific. You take the fundamentals and you arrange them for the context. So I think that's step one, is be dedicated to the learning part of it and be humble about learning from others. And then the second one is get to product market fit as soon as possible. And I think we don't teach entrepreneurial skills. At least, I went to a 4-year college institute as an engineer. Like, I don't remember ever learning any entrepreneurial stuff in that track. I probably could have sought it out, but in my Air Force training, definitely, like, I learned a lot about how to be a leader and a manager in the business context, but I never learned about human-centered design. I never learned about prototyping. I never learned about feedback loops. All these concepts. I would find a small team, very, very small. You don't need a lot of money or a lot of people. You need 4 people and some laptops for the most part in the software world, and I guess connection to the internet. Don't take no for an answer, and go see if you can solve a problem, and do those 2 things, and then see where that goes from there. And just the humility part comes into that too, because especially engineers like myself, you included, Rob, and others that we meet, like, engineers always think they're right. And like, being in the entrepreneurial innovation space, like, nothing gives you more humble pie than your users' feedback of like, the thing you delivered sucks, and like, you need to take a 70-degree pivot in a direction you never would have predicted. But humility comes in there, right? Because you can make the best thing in the world, but if nobody uses it, it's worthless.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned was, don't take no for an answer. Based upon your past experience, were there, you know, many people who said it wouldn't work, or many people who said no?
Yeah, I think, and I'll give you some credit here, Rob, even though I know you don't want to on your podcast. Like, I didn't realize how much authority a military officer could actually have if you're truly not worried about, like, I don't want to say like you're not worried about your career, because that sounds like extra negative, but if you're not afraid of like people's opinion of you, because like, you're not, I'm not talking about getting any legal, moral, ethical issues whatsoever, nothing near those. But like, there's all this cultural pressure to do things a certain way, or go to do certain things along a kind of company ladder, right? If you don't care about those things, you can actually make a ton of decisions, at least for the military officers, right, at your level. And I think that relates directly to the no thing, right? Because we ask permission a lot for things that we think we need permission for. And that's often when you get the no's, right? They're like, no, you can't do that. And you're like, well, wait a second. Do I even need your permission to be doing that? I think that's like the prerequisite you learn. And then, you know, almost anything you do, again, never do legal or illegal or immoral or unethical things. You stay away from that, which those are pretty easy to figure out, most, intelligent humans. You're basically going to get your hand slapped for doing things, right? Like, especially the younger you are. And so I think my recommendation, or my thought really is like, don't ask most of the time. You know what I mean? Like, truly take forgiveness over permission, and see how far you can take that, because people will be waiting to tell you no along the way, no matter what. And you learn that most of those people are stakeholders that actually can't say no. They're like, they have a stake in what's happening, and so they think they can influence a no. But it's really hard a lot of times in the DoD to uncover like who actually has authority. So just assume that it's yourself, as long as it's, within reason, and just go for it.
Yeah, so, this has been fantastic. I got 2 more questions for you. The second to last one, what advice would you give yourself? Especially looking back to those 80-hour work weeks, and maybe some of those times to when success wasn't inevitable. If you could tell yourself something then, what would you say?
One is to celebrate the small victories when they do come. So it's really, really tempting to just move forward onto the next thing, at least for my own personality. And I think that's true of a lot of people that are kind of grinding in the entrepreneurial and innovation space. So take the time to like celebrate the little wins, because you're going to need to be able to reflect on those to like give you enough gas in the tank to go on the days where they're few and far between. And then I always reminded myself too that like, no matter how much pressure I put on myself, or I feel like customers or stakeholders or other people are, like, our jobs aren't nearly as important as we make them out to be, just in life in general. So I'm lucky enough to have like a wife and kids every day that anchor me back to reality that like my kids don't care what I do every day. They couldn't be less interested, honestly. And so just remembering that like while it feels really important, just remember to keep things in perspective, right? Like if you fail, like life will go on. You'll be able to pick yourself up and move on. And don't go so hard that you lose those things that ground you and root you. I think that's the other advice I would give somebody, because everybody that chooses to be in this space is like kind of crazy, right? And you gotta not go too crazy, and having those kind of anchors or roots in life really helps keep perspective on what matters.
Yeah, that's awesome. Last question for you. We're still in sort of the first season of this podcast. Why should folks continue to listen?
Yeah, I've heard you ask everybody that, so I thought about it if it was coming my way. I think my answer is hope. Like give people hope, because it's like I didn't really talk a lot about being lonely, but it is lonely like charting a path in one of these things. And I've heard other guests talk about how much people are going to tell you no, and you're going to feel like an outsider, and that's all true. But I think even more, there's people sitting around with great ideas that the Department of Defense and others really need, and I think this should give people hope or even the courage to go try. And I think any one idea, if any one person listens to any of this stuff you're putting out and they go try their thing and learn, I think that's success, right? Even if that's literally one person that's sitting somewhere listening to this thinking like, oh, I really wanted to pursue this great idea, but there's no way I'd be allowed to. Like, you and I would tell them day in and day out, like, absolutely, yes, you can. Just go do it. Go do it. Don't listen to anybody else. Just go do it.
That's awesome. So it's been an absolute pleasure and honor. I didn't get to ask you what a unicorn postal service postmaster does, but maybe I'll catch that next time.
Sounds good, Rob. Thanks for having me on.